welcome you to the Lisa team's third Podium X session for this cohort. Today we're having a fireside chat with Jordan Woods and Radhika Iyengar from StartChain Ventures. And Jordan has joined us before on a panel, and we thought it'd be great to have him back and bringing Radhika along because they're both involved hand in hand in a number of really exciting initiatives that can really help everything that we're doing now and just also really expand our own understanding and appreciation for what's really happening out there in Web3 and elsewhere. So they're both from StartChain Ventures. It's a Silicon Valley-based venture studio that's tasked with solving significant global challenges with Web3, blockchain, and other advanced technologies. Together, they co-authored the best-selling book, Enterprise Blockchain Has Arrived. And in addition, both are heavily involved with the World Business Angels Investment Forum. And again, we talked, when we had our little pre-discussion, I could spend half of this meeting sort of going through all they've accomplished and all they're working on now. So no one wants to hear that, including myself. So why don't we turn it over and maybe if you both of you could go ahead and sort of provide a little color to what I just mentioned as far as what you've done, what you're working on, what the future holds. Radhika, you first?
Sure, I can kick things off. So first of all, I'm so thrilled to be here in a global audience because this is where I feel most at home is in a global setting. I'm actually originally from India, but I grew up in North Africa, in Morocco, and came to the US for all of my higher education and have certainly lived here in the US longer than anywhere else and have spent over 25 years in Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley is also my home, but I think my heart is very much where it's at home is in the global, at the global stage. And as Deepti alluded to, I guess my claim to fame is I'm quite multicultural and multilingual. I speak 10 plus languages. I say the plus because there's, languages which I don't really consider my languages, but I speak maybe the 40 phrases I can get by, plop me in there and I can pretty much manage. So it's really great to be here with all of you. Where I've come from has always been, I guess, cutting edge of technology. I started out in semiconductors eons ago, but have, wound up and found my way through many advanced technologies. And I think the most important, relevant point for today anyway, is the fact that all of what I've done, I think is about really making the world a better place. I think for me, that's where my heart is at. And so everything that I've been involved with is towards a better, making positive change. And so that comes from many fronts, such as diversity, equity, inclusion, but also just, making the world a fairer place, a more equitable place. And I think this is where Jordan and I have been very closely aligned in our journeys and our ambitions and visions, and hence why we've been working together for nearly a decade. I guess fast forward to Web3, I really got introduced to Web3, I'd say through Jordan. And I'll let him provide his own color to his background. But it's a really incredible technology, and it's going to be the underpinning of everything that is to come. And that is truly our conviction. There are so many things that are failing, that are broken from the Web 2 world. It's a whole discussion unto itself. But the hope is that you can remake, you can rebuild, and you can refashion things in a brand new way that offers the kinds of things we're looking for digitally and what it means to have digital trust. And so that's a large part of my journey with Web3. And to be clear, not to undermine what we personally are very passionate about, which is making a difference. So it's Web3 that is for positive change. It's mission-driven Web3. And that's really the topic of today. I think that's probably what I want to share about myself as it's relevant today. Jordan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So my background is originally trained as an astrophysicist at Caltech, very focused on the hard sciences and the origin of the universe. That was my first passion. And I kind of, as I went through that journey, I began to realize that I wanted to do something. Astrophysics can be pretty theoretical. So obviously there's impact in everybody's lives, but I began to realize that I wanted to kind of work in the here and now and in society. And so I ended up like Radhika, I was a bit global growing up. I did grow up in part in Europe and then across the US. But then I decided to move to Asia after I got my master's degree in physics. And I ended up moving to Hong Kong. And Hong Kong, if you're familiar, this was during the 90s, during the big airport project that was, kind of consuming and became a magnet for a lot of people. And I actually went into an environmental engineering firm. So it was kind of a counter to all of the development that was happening. I was, very focused on how do we do this more sustainably. So I've been, ever since I've gotten into my career, very focused on sustainability. And from the very early days, actually in the 90s, very focused on climate change. And so there's a lot of things that I've done in my life, I won't go into that now, but are very focused on reducing carbon footprint and trying to make the world a less toxic and more sustainable. And I've also, became an entrepreneur. We ended up growing tremendously fast. And so a lot of people say, okay, you learned in Silicon Valley how to be an entrepreneur. Actually, for me, it was more in Hong Kong, but that's for another time. So I did live also in Japan and in South Korea, and I picked up, the languages. Did at one time speak Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, a bit rusty these days. So very, excited about the Asian ecosystem for many years. I moved back to the US and became an entrepreneur and got into the whole venture space, raising nearly 50 million for my first company. And during the dot-com era, and really learning about, what it's like to build companies in Silicon Valley and, the whole Silicon Valley mindset, which I think has very strong appeal. But I think there's an importance to also be conscious, have a conscious capitalist type of an approach, which we're going to be talking about a bit today. And my second company, so my first company I ended up exiting. My second company was very focused on decentralization. That was about 20 years ago, about 8 years before Bitcoin. We did build kind of a primitive blockchain for a company which was actually set up to build out the early metaverse. So I tend to be a bit early with technologies. And so decentralization and the metaverse for me are about a 20-year journey. Fast forward to Web3, when I did see Web3 come, I was like, okay, finally, and that's really going to be a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So, a bit about my journey in terms of what's important to me. And Radhika and I, as you can tell, have a lot that's in common. And we've been, very focused on, with StartChain Ventures, which is a venture studio, building out companies, concepts, and approaches to what we're going to be talking about today, which is conscious capitalism, impact investing, mission-driven future.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. I mean, both of you, we're really honored to have you guys here. Haven't spoken to you before with Edward. It was like, this is the kind of session we had to have. And just by definition, like Web3 is an inspiring vision of this new iteration of the internet. And you guys are the thought leaders in this area. You yourselves at Jordan, you've been doing it for 20 years. The recent trend in venture capital show also that Web3 is the future, right? There's a lot of investment going on. And Lisa is anyways, we are incubating startups. So of course, they're really interested in what's next in venture capital. The underlying concepts, which are metaverse, blockchain, crypto, DeFi, and, NFT, are hazy to many of us, I must say, right? These are more like words sometimes. So can you help us demystify what exactly is Web3 for our audience here? Any one of you can take that question, whoever would like to.
Sure.
But, just like short, description of what we're getting into right now.
Yeah, maybe I can take, a first discussion, and Radhika, feel free to jump in. So Web3 at its core is about decentralization and peer-to-peer interaction. And, if you start from that foundation, if you look at the world around us, it's become heavily centralized. There's very large entities that, we go to for all of the different types of transactions that we want to carry out. So if you want to, send money to someone, if you want to send a message to someone, if you want to carry out any kind of interaction, you're going through a third party. And in many cases, that third party has become a dominant player, often a multi-trillion-dollar or a trillion-dollar or potentially larger company over the last 4 or 5 years. And so they have a lot of control. At its core, Web3, and a lot of people don't understand this because it's not been, most of what people call Web3 is really what we call Web 2.5. Web 2, and so to understand Web3, you really need to understand Web 2.5. Web 2 is there's like toll gates, and okay, if we go back to Web 1, if we just look at it very simply, you could post out information onto the web. In Web 2, you could post information onto the web, and somebody else would monetize it, right? They would end up monetizing, and that's what's been happening. In Web3, we control what we put online and we monetize it. So there's a shift in power from a centralized entity to decentralized entities, meaning ourselves. And if you look at what that means we can carry out peer-to-peer interactions with no one in between. The network that we will use is actually going to be where trust is found, and all of the interactions that we are going to be carrying out and have a few elements. One is we control our data. We control the type of interaction that we're going to have. And we can monetize those interactions in the way that we like. This is a completely different view than what we have today, where if you think about it, we don't control anything. Everything is controlled by someone else. We have accounts online, they give us our identity. If they don't like what we're doing or saying, they can, shut us down. They can take our things away from us. Monetizing our information online is very difficult. We have to go through rules that other people present in terms of how we can monetize that and how much they take from that monetization. So there's a shift away from this centralized paradigm to a paradigm where the rules are completely different. Now we're in that journey. And so today we have a lot of entities that claim to be Web3, but they actually have a Web 2 business model. So there's still a toll gate, right? They use Web3 tech, but their business model is Web 2. We call that Web 2.5 or Web 2.1 or Web 2.3. Anyway, Radhika, please go on.
Yeah, no, I wanted to add to that because I think there's some central tenets that are really, I think, from a mindset, from an ethos perspective, which is really important, I think, for everyone to understand, which is that, trust is something that is overarchingly important. Anytime you do business, have an interaction with anybody, it's about trust. And in the old days, that trust was meeting somebody face to face. Maybe a handshake, maybe a folding the hands, whatever form of respect and greeting, and you establish some level of trust. If you were to do business with somebody, that trust was enabled or has been enabled in Web 2, up till Web 2, with a larger entity that says, I am giving you the trust in order to be able to transact. What happens when one entity establishes, or a few entities establish this level of trust digitally, is that they basically control all of the information that is being exchanged. They control everything about that transaction. And so this control and access to information creates this asymmetry, is what we talk about. There's information asymmetry because those that have information have what? They have power. So this information asymmetry leads to power asymmetry. So those that have the data, those that have the power in an online digital world, those are the people that have the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. So here, when we're talking about remaking and reshaping a new future, which is much more democratized and in its ethos, there is a sense that everyone has access, equal access to something. And so there is information symmetry. The whole of Web3 is founded on, as we say, extreme transparency. And so when you have this level of extreme transparency, you can really have everybody seated at the same table with access to the same things. And so that information symmetry creates more power symmetry as well. So we all have a much more equal place at the table, rather than one person sitting at the head of the table saying, well, I control everything. I have the data. I have the keys to the kingdom. Therefore, I have the power. So I think the whole of Web3 is really a recognition of that. It's also a recognition that, you know, when I worked in semiconductors and I was working on the LAN and WAN side, that was the entrance into, you know, the cusp of digital to analog. And we were looking at how this was going to have this incredible scaling ability across the internet. And absolutely, we've had that. We've seen that, decades of growth in that. But when you look at what Web 2 has offered, at the end of the day, its underlying protocol is TCP/IP, which is a communications protocol. And so it's information that is sent from point A to point B and nothing more than that. And it was never built with things that now are becoming increasingly important, which are privacy, security. You know, these are like foundational elements actually of what we need to do when we establish trust online, when we transact online, when we do anything digitally. And if the pandemic has shown anything, we are increasingly moving into this, Jordan, you know, we've talked about phygital worlds, right? It's physical meets digital. And so everything is being transactional. So when you look at the entire digital transformation landscape, this is something that is really transformative, because now we're going to be able to have some of these things that were never really meant to be a part of the Web 2 stack at all, which was privacy and security. And so these are some of the driving forces and the driving ethos, I think, behind Web 3. And Jordan, you've been involved in this for a couple of decades now, so you've been waiting for this point. So jump in.
Yeah, maybe I'll just make one more point, but thank you so much, Radhika. That was great. This point about trust, you know, right now we go to these large entities, whoever they might be, in order to carry out a trusted transaction, and they mediate it, and they determine what's true, right? Who we are, who the counterparty is that we're carrying out a transaction with. But in a blockchain world or a decentralized world, you don't have one entity, you have thousands or tens of thousands of entities that work together to confirm what is true. And so this is therefore taking trust and decentralizing it, right? So that's really what a blockchain does. A blockchain says, okay, this is a particular entity and it has a particular identity, and this is another entity, and there's a particular transaction that's being carried out. And we are going to confirm that that transaction is true. And you have thousands and thousands of parties that in a short period of time, they confirm that all of the information is true, and they place that on a blockchain so that others can access that information. So this is what we say, is that the network provides the trust. You don't need a centralized party. The code, the code basically creates, and the ecosystem creates a trusted ecosystem. So this creates what Radhika has said, the opportunity to democratize and to level the playing field. You no longer have one group that has more information than any other or more power, and everyone in a blockchain ecosystem or a decentralized ecosystem can become a provider of services, and not just someone who is paying for services. So this is where there's an opportunity to generate money. Creators can, you know, develop, for example, NFTs. They can sell them at any price they choose. There is no restriction on how or where or pricing, etc. It becomes something based on a market dynamic. And the digital information is something that can be owned, and the entire provenance and history of that ownership available to anyone who wants to access it at any time, 24/7, 365. So these are a lot of the elements that we're not accustomed to in our daily lives. We always go to some other centralized party in order to get that kind of information. And the other thing is that this is really based on, again, with the extreme transparency, all code bases are typically open source in a decentralized ecosystem. And so you can contribute, you can fork information and create derivative works, which are also open source. There's this sense that everyone is working together in order to build a community which provides opportunity for everyone. Now, that is clearly not what we're seeing, so something is wrong. And what is wrong is that we're at this transition point between Web 2 and Web 3, where a lot of people don't understand what Web 3 is, but they do understand Web 2. And so they're entering the ecosystem through Web 2 business models that claim to be Web 3. That is something that we need to move through this transition to get to true Web 3.
I think I'll just add to what you just said, Jordan, and that is that, as we transition into this new world, it's not uncommon actually to what we all experience, some of us might have experienced. And, when we started using the internet, for example, there was a lot of, perceptions around new technologies are difficult because the majority of human beings, I think, resist change. We get very, very comfortable in whatever world we're in. And whenever something new comes along, it's this just a little uncomfortable. It's just, I'm not sure what this is. I don't understand it. And when you don't understand it, there's also fear of the unknown. The internet had that as well. I certainly remember the days when the internet was banned in enterprise. I certainly remember the days when the internet was considered illicit, nefarious, all of those bad things. Bad people are over there. You don't want to be over there. And things changed, right? Because enterprise got involved and legitimized the space. And, we saw e-commerce just take off, skyrocket. Scalability in an enterprise was, wow, this was a new meaning, right, of what it meant to build a scalable enterprise. And so the similar sorts of things are happening with any new technology. That is part of the adoption curve of a new technology. And we certainly talk about that in our book. And in fact, I'm very happy that we called out the timeline of adoption for Web3 and for blockchain. And it's pretty much tracking, on track. We'll talk about a few exceptions to that. But I think this is what I wanted to set is the context for this transition, is that as we march into this brave new world, so to speak, which is Web3, and it's a very new way of thinking about things, a new way of doing business, people are going to eventually not think about that anymore. I mean, who talks about the internet when we do this, when we have the Zoom meeting? Who talks about API calls when we do anything, right? So there gets to be a point when you don't really think about the technology at all. It's really the utility of that technology. It's what the technology delivers that is far more important. And so the usability and the user experience of that technology will really be the thing that takes the centerpiece. But at this point, Deepti, to your point, a lot of people look at that and say, oh, it's just, I don't want to think about that, right? It's all bad stuff, and of course, a lot of the bad stuff does get a lot of the press. So let's be clear about that too. It's really that which, claims that sensationalism that is out there. But there's a lot of really amazing capabilities with this digital transformation through Web3. And that's really the side that we're on. And we are very much driven around what good things, what positive things can we generate with this technology. This is not about some frivolous exercise.
Yeah, maybe we can give some examples. That'd be helpful, Deepti. And
Sure, I mean, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, you know what?
So
Go ahead. I just, wanted to maybe sort of give a counterpoint almost.
yeah, sure, please.
It's because I've been a little familiar with it, and you guys a fantastic explanation, and it seems gray, almost utopian, really. Considering how people fear change, as you said very clearly. Just looking last year alone, I think was it 30 billion invested in blockchain related technologies. And what that says to me on one hand is there's a lot of capital trying to find investments out there. But the other is those same people in Web 2 and Web 1 who have the investment capabilities are trying to influence what happens in Web 3. So I know it's supposed to be democratized and it sounds great, but how do you keep out those bad actors and keep those people with the money from defining what truth is?
Yeah, that's very important. That's why there needs to be investment, right, into what we call the core Web3. Because right now, if you talk to a lot of the people investing, they're investing in Web 2.5, and they're investing in Web 2.5 for a couple of reasons. One, the venture model is really based on building unicorns, right? And the way unicorns are typically built is that there might be a lot of different, companies that come into a particular new space, but at the end of the day, there's going to be maybe 3 actors, and one is going to have dominant market share. And that one, is easy to pick out. If you think about any tech industry, you're usually going to see, one dominant player and maybe a few others. And at some point there might be hundreds, but that's kind of, picking winners in the ecosystem. So, that model is something that is tried, true, tested, it works. And so if you can pick winners and then they scale and they take over ecosystems and then generate, massive quantities of wealth, that's a model that's very successful in venture, and people are going to continue to do it. So what you have to do is you have to say, well, what's a different model where everyone can still make a lot of money, but it's more democratized. And this is where conscious capitalism comes in, because what we've seen is when you do go to these extreme centralization, you get a lot of very negative impacts on society, which we don't need to go into because it's been everywhere. And I'm pretty sure everybody knows about the things that I'm talking about. So, how do you, put a new paradigm in place that is going to generate money? And so, the approach, if you look at it, one of the approaches, if you look at the Ethereum network is something that I like to look at. It's actually what got me very excited about kind of the Web3 transition. Not that it's been perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it does provide a model where the entity that deployed the network actually now owns a very tiny percentage of it, like less than 1%. And there is a lot of money going through the network, and there is the opportunity to generate enormous capital, off of the Ethereum network. And we're going to see this continue to, proliferate, because it basically becomes like a new web that you can generate huge amounts of companies out of that all use the same protocol, the same network, and things like this. So you don't necessarily need the same paradigm. You need to have a different paradigm. And if we go with the same paradigm, you're just going to end up with the same thing. So that's the thing, is you have to, think about network effects in a different way, not network effects where everything moving to one entity, but where you have billions and trillions of network effects that are happening, and you're taking a small piece of all of those different, everything that's happening within the ecosystem, you're taking a small percentage, but you're also enabling innovation on the back of your platform, which wouldn't have happened otherwise. So it's not just Ethereum, there's many models, but then you also have self-governing organizations like DAOs. I don't know if we have time to talk about that in this session, but there is a way to move towards a decentralized paradigm where you can foster innovation, like massive amounts of innovation, and you can generate enormous amounts of money for everyone that's involved. So I think that's going to be very important, but that hasn't taken hold yet.
I think I'll just add to what you just said too briefly, and that is that, with decentralization and self-governance, you have to have the right guardrails in place. And this is where I'm also working on the side of technology meets policy. You have to have the right governance in place in network to ensure that the intended outcomes are achieved, right? And so if you've got a bad actor, you talked about bad actors, how do you throw them out? I mean, this is one of the reasons why enterprise blockchain, which is very different from permissionless. So there's permissionless and permission. We're not going to get into all of that, but in permissioned blockchains, a lot of the central driving forces is, well, KYC AML. I need to know who you are in order for me to do business with you, right? And so full vetting and disclosure and verification of that entity or person, et cetera, is really a core aspect of enterprise blockchain. So the trust then becomes a KYC'd, AML trusted network. And so that there's a power to that. In a truly decentralized fashion, like what Jordan was talking about, it is, the trust comes from incentivizing the right behaviors, right? You reward positive behaviors, you deter negative behaviors, right? You disincentivize it. And the way to kick out bad actors is, everyone has a view into what's happening real time into the transactions, into the network. And so if you've got something bad happening, you can go in and say, well, where is this happening, and pinpoint the problem. It's much easier to do in an enterprise fashion because all of the entities are vetted and are disclosed. Basically, everybody knows who the other nodes are. And so it's very much quicker to arrive at some semblance of action, towards something bad that's happening, saying, why did this happen? Is this intentional? Is it something that was an honest mistake, et cetera, et cetera? And so there are governance rules that come from that. Obviously, having the right governance frameworks, I think, is not an easy proposition. I mean, it is more difficult. It is one of the big challenges. Everything has challenges to it, because at the end of the day, entities are run by whom? By human beings. And lots of human beings have flavors of trust. I'll just say that in a gentle way. There are some who will really uphold trust and honesty and ethics in the right way. And there are others who have a more flexible view on what that means. And so, I think in a governance framework, it's tricky to get everybody to be on that same page. And we're still on the on-ramp of that. I think in DAOs, I think what's really exciting is that when you have everybody having the capacity to participate in decision making, it's a very, very empowering feeling to say, I'm at the table and I have a voice at the table. And my voice, by the way, is not just any voice, it's a decision making voice. And that's something that is very different in a centralized architecture that we find today. It might be simpler in some ways. Maybe people think having one entity make all the decisions is efficient or easy. But that trust is enormous, enormous. And these entities take advantage and exploit those systems all the time.
Radhika, you bring a very, very interesting point regarding governance frameworks, as well as, bad actors and all sorts of actors being there, and also democratization here. But, also at the same time, young entrepreneurs are leading charge in more open and equitable future, right? And with new technology comes also new opportunities to make an impact. We have a few startups in Lisa that are working on social entrepreneurship and also, introducing impact frameworks in their value propositions. What would be interesting to know is also that how could these entrepreneurs, in using Web3, how could they help in amplifying those social impacts without these governance, models being in place yet? And I'm sure they have a big role to play here as well.
Yeah, we're working with quite a few, companies. Maybe I could just jump in very briefly, just with a conceptual framework, and then we can kind of move forward. Because, it's very important to understand that right now under Web 2, it's very easy to send information to someone else. We use chat and we use, email, we use a lot of different things, and it's pretty easy and usually free. But to send money to other people is a bit more complicated, especially if you do it internationally. So if you really look at the international, the idea is with Web3 networks, you can send value, not just money, but value. And when I talk about value, this could be IP, this could be art, this could be, documents that are like deeds of trust, all kinds of things. And you can send these in a secure way, and you can do it instantly, right? And so if you think about this, the impact would be like, when you are buying and selling a home, it can be done within a day or two, right? If you are carrying out a transaction where you're sending billions of dollars between governments, it can be done instantaneously. If you are doing remittances, you don't lose 30% of the money. And this is a big issue for the developing world. People in the developing world, you have diaspora, and they send money back home, and they work very hard. There's a lot of sacrifice. And then one entity takes 20%, another entity takes 10%. It can, you want something to be expedited, it's another 10%. You can lose, the majority of the small amount of money that you're sending back home because of middlemen. And the idea is you want to go peer-to-peer. If you go peer-to-peer in these different like remittance situations, for example, but it could be any two entities, you can reduce the cost down to zero. And that's the idea, that you send value at the same way we send information, and you do it in a trusted way with no cost. And so that's really the idea. Maybe the cost won't be zero, but it's going to be very small, just like the cost for email is not zero, but is very small, right? The cost for anything that we do online is not zero, but it's small. So the idea is being able to do that. And if you can put in a Web3 network where you're going peer-to-peer and there aren't middlemen, and this can be for supply chains, this can be for all kinds of different networks. Supply chains right now, this seems to be a problem that's just come because of the pandemic. It has been like this for thousands of years. This is nothing new. Blockchain networks are providing extreme transparency, and the types of problems that we have today would not exist. Right? And this has been proven out in multiple instances. So the issues with the pandemic is because the systems that are behind all of these centralized, siloed networks are fundamentally inefficient. And then you have middlemen that are in between that are capitalizing and making these networks even more inefficient. And so it's really a network theory. If you really want to get down to it, how do you improve and optimize networks? And that's what you can do with Web3, because you're going peer-to-peer, right? Just like the internet did. You don't have all these, people in the middle taking money. And so there are so many different instances, especially in the developing world, where there's tremendous inefficiency in networks, where you can make networks far more efficient. And as a result, people who often aren't well capitalized, aren't losing huge quantities of the small amounts of money that they are making and transferring. They actually have nearly 100% of that.
Well, here's another example. I mean, all great examples too. I'll give another example, which I think is very important, because it can't be done in Web3. If somebody put out in chat saying, sounds like Web3 is not creating anything new, but it's just building or adding to Web 2. That's actually incorrect. First of all, the infrastructure is completely different. I mean, we do not have a centralized architecture in Web 3. It's completely decentralized. And so that in and of itself means that you're not adding to Web 2. So I just wanted to put that as a clarification. But, think about the positive change that we're talking about. In trade finance, for example, you've got small, medium businesses that are in a supply chain, in a vendor pool, in a supplier pool. And in order to fulfill their orders, they might have to take a loan, right? Because they need resources, they need materials, they need to do something, and they need to procure this stuff. And in order to do that, they need a loan. They need money to make this happen. They go to the bank, and the bank says, well, XYZ, mom and pop store, whatever. I don't know who you are. You're not some big entity. You've got no credibility business-wise. I can't trust you, right? So the loan is denied. And so this holds up the chain, or they're kicked out of the supply chain pool because they can't survive.
Can I just throw in something there, Radhika?
Yes.
So just two statistics on that. One, this happens 50% of the time in the real world. This is not theoretical. In the developing world, it happens 70 or 80% of the time. And in supply chains globally are about 50 trillion. There's about $9 trillion locked of inventory in supply chains because of this issue. So this is a very large issue.
Thank you, Jordan, for that context, which is really, really important. So back to the example. So now you've got in a blockchain scenario, that small, medium-sized business can basically show proof of their orders. They can verify those orders because it's all in the blockchain. It's all verifiable. It's all vetted information, right? It's trusted information that resides on the blockchain because it's immutable. There's no manipulation of data involved. And so you've got an ability for a small enterprise to be able to demonstrate what they actually have on their books, right? And that it's verified. This is bona fide information. This is not something they're fabricating. And so there's a possibility to generate trust off of this information such that they can now perhaps secure that loan and actually fulfill their orders. So that's an example. Trade finance is a hugely impactful area. Much of the emerging markets and developing world works off of this kind of small, medium-sized business participation in a supply chain, in any transaction that you're talking about along this chain. And so this is a very game-changing type of transparency and trust that gets capitalized to enable a smaller business to succeed. Go ahead.
Sorry, can I just give an example for that?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So what does this mean exactly in terms of trade finance and in terms of the real world for social entrepreneurship? So we're working with a group that we've known for over a decade that's in Kenya. They are working with unbanked female entrepreneurs, people that don't have a bank account, right? And so if you don't have a bank account, how do you do business, right? And so, well, with a crypto wallet, you have a bank account. It's your own, right? And you don't need a bank, another bank. You have your own, which is your wallet. But how do you then get a loan? Well, if you set up a network where you are carrying out transactions, you now have a history. And so from the history of the transactions you're carrying out, you can then use DeFi. DeFi, decentralized finance, is where people with money will provide you with a loan, not a bank, but just another individual with a wallet. So they will now make a determination based on your history of sales, which is the same thing that a bank will do, of whether or not you're going to be able to repay the loan. And maybe they give you a $25, microfinance microloan. And then you repay it, right, over a certain period of time. And then just like a bank, it can be done. So you can have banks aren't part of the picture. You have individuals who have no bank accounts, who are being able to carry out business, get loans, because they're now interacting with other people and this is a real company, real world.
Yeah, this is a real company.
So this is
enabling thousands of women entrepreneurs. Largely, it's the women who are unbanked, and this is out of East Africa.
Yeah. So this is a small example of what's possible, but now these women are generating income. They're lifting their families out of poverty. There's, the ability now for other people that are in the community that have money. There's a concept in Africa that's called Chama, where people share money. And so they're making a DeFi version of Chama in order to, basically pool resources through the community in a decentralized way, which is what you would do typically with cash, but they're actually digitizing it. And so you can take a lot of models in the developing world. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of decentralized finance models that have been around for decades or even hundreds of years. And you can actually digitize those. There's no banks, there's no large entities that are involved. And you actually put it into a platform that runs on a cell phone, which makes it more convenient.
So I think that, the bottom line is that for us, seeing these real world examples, this is a real company that is making a difference to thousands of women. And as it's been pointed out, women are the backbone of society, I feel, because we don't think just about ourselves. We think about our families, we think about our communities. Talk to any woman entrepreneur, she's thinking about what good can I do with this? It's a very inherent part of our DNA, I feel. And so I think what this company is doing with thousands of women entrepreneurs, enabling them to participate in a financial structure that is until now barred. They're not allowed to open a bank account, right? It's always through the husband or whomever. And so your level of empowerment for these women, and by the way, they're backed by the Gates Foundation. there is a big push on seeing this level of social inequity solved. And it's huge. And this is very much about the social good kind of applications and, execution that is possible with a Web3 model and with blockchain, which is very different and basically not possible at all in a Web2 model. So I think that for us, it's really focusing on that aspect, is what kind of positive change can be generated with this as the underpinning technology. And there's some very new models. Again, new models are not something that everybody's going to embrace right away, because it's a different way of doing things. E-commerce went through that. Oh, wait a minute, I want to go to that brick and mortar store and buy directly from that store. I don't trust this online thing. Is the item I just ordered actually going to be delivered to me, or are they just going to steal my money, right? So there's a lot of trust, of remaking that trust in different points along the emerging technology timeline. And I think this is a new point at cusp of very big change that we're seeing, where we're remaking certain things because the old models just can't serve the purposes that we want them to serve.
And that's a perfect example for the next question. We only have 7 minutes left, but
Crazy.
I know you both are also doing a lot of work to increase diversity and inclusion in the STEM ecosystem with education. Do you care to speak a little about that, please?
Sure.
Yes, I think for us, again, everything that motivates what we're doing is about creating positive change, and increasing diversity and equity and inclusion is a big part of our own personal journeys and now our joint journeys. But I think, for us, we have some initiatives, diverse initiatives, as you might expect. And some of those are related to NFTs. Jordan's been doing things around the metaverse for like 2 decades, and he's been waiting for this point. And so we were looking at the NFT movement, if you will, that was happening starting last year. It started before that, but it really kind of catapulted into the stratosphere last year. And we're not talking about cartoon images. We're not talking about doodles. We're not talking about any of those. Those are entertainment value. People can do that all day long. They love that. Fine, no problem. There's also amazing powers that come from these NFT collections, because at the end of the day, an NFT is verifiable proof of ownership of a rare or unique digital asset. You're also creating a community around that. And the power of a community, back to that Web3 ethos, is incredibly important, because you have a group of individuals who are like-motivated, like-minded, like-inspired to do like-minded things. And so the power of a community to generate a swell of positive change is really quite remarkable. And so one of the projects that we're doing is launching an NFT collection that is entirely focused on increasing access to science, to technology, to education, the arts, because many people from diverse backgrounds, underrepresented communities, don't have that access. They are outside of the system and they can't qualify, they don't know about it. Whatever it is, they're prevented from actually having the kind of access that they should have access. And so for us, we have a foundation attached to this collection. So this is not just some frivolous exercise again for us, which is some of the proceeds of that collection will absolutely be funding the foundation. We are already in talks with large foundations and organizations about specific programs that we feel are going to be aligned with our mission, and that these programs are actually going to generate the level of change that we hope to see. And by the way, there's going to be a feedback loop around that, where we want to see the results of what is then, contributed to those programs. We want them to be able to share the success stories with the community. And there's a loop effect that is also going to be secured, I think, by blockchain, I hope. And so there's this level of transparency around what we're doing and what is coming back to the community, what is coming back to empower different groups that we are selecting, with this initial collection. I mean, we're going to have a whole roadmap of collections planned, but with this initial collection that's going to be launched next month, we're very excited, because we know that greater opportunities in STEAM is incredibly important to a diverse and hitherto underrepresented group of individuals. So anything that we can do to ease and amplify that access, I think, is going to be incredibly important.
Yeah, and I'll just add very quickly to that. You may have heard of the Constitution DAO, which was a decentralized autonomous organization that was set up in order to buy the Constitution. They weren't successful at doing that, but it kind of proved out, in a sense, the model. This is similar, right? This is setting up a DAO. The membership is through purchasing an NFT that gives you a very easily verifiable token that enables anyone to check if you're a member of the community. And then the community is going to direct the funds that come into the foundation into various activities. So it's going to become a self-governing organization. We're going to set it up, but we want the community to actually manage the funds and decide on who gets the funds and how the funds are used, and also checking to ensure that the funds are used in the right way and that we're getting the types of results that we're trying to do. And so we want to have ambassadors as well, who are very diverse individuals that we're also bringing in. And we're also providing a lot of about 5% of the membership in the DAO to people who cannot afford it. So the underrepresented, and that we are hoping to help, we also want to be part of the organization.
I mean, the last thing I'll say is, there's a lot of imagery involved. I mean, in the very beginning, I think Preetham, I think you asked why the stars and all that. There's a great deal of imagery for us. Number one, I mean, I think the obvious homage or references to Jordan's background in astrophysics, and I'm an astronomy buff myself. But the second reference is the fact that for us, reaching for the stars is something that we take very seriously. Whether it's the venture studio, whether it's the fund we're building, whether it's entrepreneurs we're working with, any of the endeavors that we are involved with, whether it's this collection that we're reaching, that we're releasing, this reaching for the stars is really about, anybody being able to do anything. And this is the capacity to be able to do something. And what can we do to help those individuals reach for the stars?
I always love how you guys talk about rocket ships and stars.
Yeah, it's very powerful imagery.
Absolutely. I would still add one more question. We started 5 minutes late, so if you can give like an answer in like 1-2 sentences, I don't know if it's possible. But there is no talk about Web3 without the talk of metaverse. So I don't know if you guys can just add a very quick note on what issues need to be addressed to make metaverse more inclusive from your perspective. And at the same time, if you can add to that as well, that there are barriers to entry to metaverse,
Yeah.
right? And new entrepreneurs or startup businesses, it's not easy for them to kind of, get to that so easily. So yeah, any quick thoughts on that before we...
Sure, I'll jump in. I mean, I think that again, it starts with the diverse core. So whoever is building that metaverse, make it a diverse team, because otherwise you're going to be blindsided with so many aspects, because a diverse team thinks about the many things that comprise what we call an inclusive and truly open metaverse. Where I have a critique on what's being done currently, and that is very popular, and the reason why bro culture is so prevalent is because you've got the same usual suspects building all these new things, and all of the same biases, conscious and unconscious, are replicated in whatever they're creating in the metaverse. And it's really disheartening to see that. So I think starting with a diverse core is absolutely that number one requirement, because that person will think about, or a diverse person will think about something in a totally new way that you didn't think about yourself. And so these considerations are incredibly important. Let me be very specific about that. When I'm talking about the metaverse, and I've been on panels with women, what we're talking about is a safe metaverse, a metaverse that has an ethics platform built behind it, so that we don't have to replicate egregious behaviors that we see in real life. That's something that's incredibly important to us as women. We don't want to be in a metaverse space and have an unpleasant experience, a traumatic experience in that space. We want that space to be safe for us to be able to interact. And yet what's out there is very much this sort of bro culture that is sort of perpetuating, and it's really replicating a lot of the same failings that we're seeing in real life. So for me, that's very, very important as a woman.
Can I add one point there, Radhika? So again, I've been in the metaverse space for about 20 years. It wasn't until I spoke to Radhika and other women in 20 years that I ever heard about safety and ethics in the metaverse. So if you just have a group of guys that were focused on metaverse, we never brought up this point ever. It didn't even, most of us came from gaming. You went into a game in order to do combat. And so it wasn't considered to be safe, but it wasn't something that came back to you. There were books that talked about, like Snow Crash and Matrix and others, that what you do in the metaverse, can impact you in the real life. But it wasn't something we really thought about seriously. But for women, it's like the number one concern. So you have to have a much more diverse team, or you're not going to actually make it inclusive.
And this is
that's
just one example.
One point.
It's one example of diversity. The same thing happens to AI or anything. The reason why we're seeing so many holes is because we've got a monochromatic, unidimensional kind of core team creating whatever it is that they're creating, and the same blind spots keep appearing. That's not by happenstance. That's because the same group of people keep repeating the same kinds of mistakes. And so unless we fix it right at the foundation, which is inviting diverse participation in the creation of something new, we're going to continue to see the same kind of failings perpetuated. So this is something that is incredibly important. I'm very passionate about this particular point, saying whatever metaverses are created, we need to remember to create those with a diverse outlook right from the get-go.
And one last final point, which is this tension between Web 2, where it's a closed universe, meaning that you don't own anything and somebody is providing it to you and you can't actually monetize the way you want.
A large entity is putting out that kind of metaverse.
Right, exactly. And the open metaverse. The open metaverse is where there can be a proliferation of worlds of any kind. They're interoperable, they can interact, they can make their own rules. And there's not just one. There's not just one metaverse. There are actually the concept of the metaverse is wrong. It's metaverses, right? There's thousands and thousands. And I've done a survey. There's already today probably a few hundred metaverses that exist. If you read the press, there's maybe 3, but there's actually hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And we're actually aligning with the launch of our collection with DEI-focused metaverses. DEI-focused metaverses that exist that you would never have heard of. They're actually pretty amazing places.
Better. They're actually developed much better. And this is a much better experience, but they just don't get the press and they don't get the highlights. But yet it's an incredibly vibrant, inclusive community. I think that this is really the core tenet of what we're building. Our Web3 is vibrant and inclusive. That really is very much at the heartbeat of what we're doing. Because otherwise, look at the colors that we have today. Look at the diversity that we have online. This is the way the world ought to be, right? And it's supposed to be in celebration of the great biodiversity we have on this planet, not making it a monoculture.
Absolutely. It's a great note to end on. I'm a big fan of diversity and inclusion and equity as well. What you guys are talking about is also in Web 2.0, I would say. Femtech was so neglected, right?
Yes, it still is.
It still is.
So
right? Sad. Or the biases that they exist. So, Web3 brings a lot of different paradigm shifts, as you guys talked about. And when you're building this new space, I think you need to unlearn some of the things we've done in the past. And just bring new knowledge to the table, which is what both of you guys are doing. And I know you guys are also building, you have a focus on the community building as around that as well, which is great. Just thanks so much for sharing your thoughts. We have a lot of questions in the chat as well, and we had much more questions as well, as part of the session. But we're happy to maybe, kind of host you guys maybe sometime again later and kind of continue this conversation.
Part 2, I guess. I'll just to, with one of the questions that came up on compliance and security and regulations, I'll just say it's really critical. Regulations can be a hindrance, but they can also be an enabler. And so I work at the intersection of technology and policy for this reason, because I really want to see the right kind of policies being developed around Web3. I've been a member of the Select Task Force Blockchain Working Group in California, advising California State Legislature and the governor on the implications and applications of blockchain. And our work as a group between 2019 and 2020 yielded just a few weeks ago, about a month plus ago, with the governor coming out with an executive order around the responsible use of Web3 tech. I was super excited for that moment. So it's not to say that the regulation has already been built, but it is setting the stage for what's to come. And what we need is much more powerful regulation that doesn't, when I say powerful, it's not mean to curtail people's rights. It's meant for consumer safety in mind, however, not at the expense of innovation, right? Innovation has to have a safe harbor zone. It has to be able to develop and flourish, but we also have to be mindful of consumer protections. And so this is the role of government, is to make sure that we have the right guardrails around consumer protections, albeit some of those regulators are living still in the 1930s and 40s. They're working off of that regulation. So, it's about educating and building awareness around the new models. And this is why I took an active part in this task force, is because I wanted to be a person that was bringing clarity to a very important technology, to give them the best tools and knowledge and awareness available, such that hopefully our regulators and legislators can develop the right kinds of policies around this technology.
Perfect. Thank you so much for ending on that note. And very insightful session. I hope everybody else, enjoyed it as much as me and Edward did talking to you guys. And hopefully another session with you guys in some time. But thank you so much for joining us. And
Thank you.
everybody else.
Thanks, Deepti. Thanks, Edward. And thanks, everyone.
Yes, thanks, Deepti and Edward, and everyone. I hope to, speak with you all again.
Yep.
Right.
Thank you.
Cheers. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
And the power be with you, however that sign works in Star Trek. Yeah.
How
do we reach
I've got
How do
it
we
on
reach
Star Trek.
Jordan and Radhika if you want, in the future?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
connect
how-
with us on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is
yeah,
best.
feel free.
Okay.
Tell
Okay.
me, I didn't recognize everybody's names. I think there was a couple of pages, so just tell me that it was part of this session, because I don't want to leave somebody out, but they would be helpful to have a reference to this session particularly.
That's
Mhm.
okay. I will certainly reach out because I have lots and lots of questions. I have a lot of experience in Africa, 30-something years in different countries in banking. And as you guys were speaking, and now I'm in Zurich, at UBS, one of the biggest the biggest wealth manager in the world.
Mm.
There are so many things you guys are talking about that I think I need to maybe troubleshoot a little bit some of those concepts, especially around security, around compliance issues, and the cost of, building a brand that is trusted. We talked a lot about trust. And how do you build that trust on a digital platform? That is the question. And what I've come to find out over time is that when systems are deployed newly, there's a lot of optimism. And then comes crashes, experiences that make them begin to tighten up, and they go back to square one and making it a little bit difficult because of experiences. But I guess we will talk more about this if I get a chance.
Sure. Yeah. I just say that blockchain gives everybody their own bank. So, but we can talk about
The
that
bank
more.
is you.
And the network is the trust. You don't
Yeah.
need a brand. There's no
No,
brand.
it's a really fascinating transition we're at. It's a completely different mindset around it. And maybe that's a separate discussion altogether, because I think there's a lot of questions that come out of something like this. And this is what we're experiencing too. And we're happy to share, because it's very important for us to share the right kinds of information. There's so much misinformation out there, or lack of understanding. There's a lot of ambiguity sometimes, and so our job as thought leaders is to try to lend as much clarity and illuminate as much as possible.
Okay, great. Thank you.
What I would also recommend to you guys, if you go to StartChain Ventures, website, there's a lot of information out there as well on the videos and all the things that they've written in the book.
We have
Yes,
a
we have
channel on YouTube,
We
and
do. We
Okay.
do.
Absolutely.
Right.
But
Sure.
we'll try another session with you guys for sure.
Sure.
I don't know how and when it will take some time, but we'll try. All right,
Bye.
guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Nice to do it. Have a great day.
Have a nice day.
Bye-bye. Nice meeting you.